Okay.
So welcome to another Nova Scribes,
Okay.
and Sarah, over to you.
All right. Thanks, Brian, and thanks everyone for being here. I am excited to join you all tonight and to share a little bit about what I've been thinking about and some things that I've been learning over the recent months. And I'm also I'm a fan of Nova Scribes. I've been a member of Nova Scribes for a long time, and so it's just exciting to be kind of on the other side of the camera doing the presentation and the facilitation of the session tonight. So while I get the screen share set up, I would like to invite you, if you don't already have something, and if you're not driving, if you don't already have something in front of you, just grab like a sheet of paper, just any sheet of paper. It can be notebook, printer, like a scratched sheet of paper, probably bigger than just a sticky note, but it doesn't have to be enormous. And of course, something to write with as well. So a pen, a marker, a pencil, anything like that. And while you're doing that, I will get the screen share started. And hopefully that looks good. See here, I want to, make sure I can still see you all and see the chat. So, all right. So the topic of this discussion tonight, and it certainly is discussion, as much as y'all would like to kind of jump in and ask questions and express your curiosities along the way. The topic is how visual practitioners can advance planetary sustainability. And I will caveat right off the bat, I apologize if I say coaches every once in a while, because I just came from attending day one of the Capital Coaches Conference here in the DC area and gave this presentation to a group of ICF coaches yesterday morning. So it is very much the word coach and the topic coach is definitely on my mind. So apologize in advance if I like accidentally intersperse that. But I did want to just kind of point out sort of what I mean by visual practitioners in this case. I think most people in the Nova Scribes community are kind of familiar with this category. But for anybody who's not, or anybody who might be watching the recording of this video in the future, visual practitioners are anyone who uses visual tools to advance a process or kind of tell a story in a creative way. And so that might be a graphic reporter, a graphic facilitator, a visual coach, or really just anybody who kind of appreciates and understands the power of visual. So it really is kind of a broad swath. And so I hope that everybody sort of feels included in that category, whether you came in here identifying yourself as a visual practitioner or not. So this is the topic that I'm going to be sharing with you. And what we're going to do really is explore this topic of planetary sustainability. And I'll share a little bit more about what I mean there. But before we get into that, I want to invite everybody to just do a kind of a quick little warm up with me. Most of you kind of know how these things go. Just the other day, I was with a bunch of Nova Scribe friends, and I was reminded of how much I enjoy the Crazy Eights activity for just getting our creative juices flowing. So we're going to do that real quick with the piece of paper that you hopefully have by now. And it's really pretty straightforward. So I'll kind of demonstrate here on camera. What I want you to do is just fold your sheet of paper in half one time. And then when you have it in half, just fold it again, second time. And then finally, one last time. So you should have 3 folds, roughly in half. Doesn't have to be perfect. And what happens, hopefully, if you've done that, is when you open it up, you have 8 squares or rectangles in your paper. You should have 8 places that are sort of distinct from each other. All right, I see a thumbs up. Good. That's confirmation that my instructions were readable and understandable. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a little timer on the presentation. You'll be able to see it on the screen, and I think you'll hopefully be able to hear it as well. But we're just going to spend 1 minute jotting down some ideas. And the concept here is to write one idea in each square. And the topic is, what in your mind are the most important skills for a visual practitioner to have? And it can be anything. So just off the top of your head, one idea per square, and we'll just stay on the front side of the page for now. If you end up with more than one idea in a square, that's totally cool. I'm going to go ahead and set our little timer and start it. Okay, time's up. If anybody would like to share, I'd love to hear one or two of the skills that you wrote or maybe you drew on your sheet of paper.
I said listening and illustrating or drawing.
Yeah, definitely.
I'd say adaptability and just like openness, like being open-minded.
Nice. Thank you. Yeah.
I also said synthesizing and sense making. So taking all of it, saying, right, how do we crush this down into like the most essential part of it?
Yeah. Yeah. I like that you said emphasizing. That's one that I often either forget or kind of struggle with, like in the moment when I'm doing a visual practice type thing, like graphic recording. So thank you for that reminder. All right. So now that we've kind of warmed up our creative juices and we've also tuned into things like listening and illustrating and adaptability, I think these are going to be really good kind of touch points as we get into this discussion. So you can go ahead and just kind of set your paper to the side. We will use it again. So just kind of hold that thought and we will move on to the objectives for today. So essentially, it's pretty straightforward. I would like to really right off the bat, raise our awareness of the Sustainable Development Goals. Don't worry if you don't know what that is yet, because we will get into it. And then I will introduce a framework for visual practitioners and others, really it's for anybody, to advance those Sustainable Development Goals. And I'm going to be providing a lot of like tools and resources for further discovery. So rather than like diving deep into some of these topics, I'm going to share like a very kind of high level view of some of them. And there are a lot of links in the slides. And also I just have like a list of links that I'm also providing at the like in the slide deck. So those of you who are here tonight will get a copy of that and you can like follow up on any of these topics that you really want to dive into. So it's kind of, I've been explaining to people, this is a little bit like me sharing with you all of the like open tabs that have been in my browser for like the last year and a half. So brace yourself. All right. So before we kind of get into these topics and objectives, you might just be wondering a little bit about like, why am I the person who's giving this particular presentation? And why is this the topic that I've chosen, and why now? So I'm going to kind of take each of those questions a little bit one at a time, because I think it's an important kind of context. So I'm going to start with why me. And this is kind of interesting because some of you know me a bit, and I'm part of the community, and I have a certain identity that is part of like the visual practitioner world. But there's a lot of other things that like I've done in my life and my career before becoming a visual practitioner that I think are relevant to share, just to kind of provide a little bit of context and why this topic in particular is important to me. So starting back in like college days, so I was a geology major and really enamored with earth science. And in particular, that's where I learned about a subject called Earth system science, which is all about how the planet's systems operate and interact with each other and kind of influence each other. And I just got really like interested in that. Eventually went to grad school to study science documentary filmmaking, basically like wildlife films and nature films, that kind of thing, which ultimately led me to getting a fellowship where I went to work at the Goddard Space Flight Center at NASA here in the DC area. And I discovered when I got there that that was actually like the birthplace of Earth system science, which is really cool. So I kind of like was like hanging out at the heart of earth science, like at the forefront of it, at this premier institution with thousands and thousands, the largest number total of earth scientists in the world work right here in DC. So that was a very cool experience. I did that for a long time and ended up training scientists in communication, like how to be effective communicators, especially with public audiences. And believe it or not, so this week has actually been a really interesting week for me, with Hurricanes Helene and Milton arriving in Florida and North Carolina and elsewhere, because it is extremely reminiscent of 2005, when I was working as a full-time earth science communicator for NASA. And one of the big parts of my job was basically 24-hour news coverage of hurricane season, because NASA has eyes in the sky, of course, earth science satellites. And so we had like images and videos of all these hurricanes. And in 2005, it was Katrina and Wilma and many others. I think there were like 21 named storms that year, back to back, just like 1 week after the other. And it was, I mean, at the time, of course, it was emotionally devastating to be confronted with all of that tragedy. And so it's just been a very interesting week for me to be almost kind of reliving some of that, and watching it sort of unfold right before our eyes. And part of that is really part of what made that an emotional time, was that I was helping NASA's earth scientists tell the story of like why these hurricanes were intensifying so rapidly and what was causing that. And of course, at the time, this was 2005, there was a lot of rejection of climate change and the science of climate change and global warming and all of that. And so it was like this really difficult chapter of me and a lot of other people sort of shouting into the void, like, hey, everybody pay attention. There's this really serious situation that's getting worse, and we're literally watching it happen. And people were essentially not listening. And it made it really difficult to be a climate science communicator. And so ultimately, like after years and years of doing this and feeling like no one was ever listening and taking it seriously, I sort of moved on. I needed to take a break because it was exhausting and kind of debilitating after a while. And it turns out, I found out later, that a lot of climate scientists and climate communicators do this. They just stop because they get really tired and they get frustrated and burned out, which we'll come back to in just a moment. So anyway, not to make this too long of a story, so I'll just kind of skip to the middle chapter, which is I took a break from all the climate stuff, and I did leadership development, and I became a coach, and I became a visual facilitator, and learned about human-centered design and mergers and acquisitions. And this has been a really fun chapter. This chapter is actually just now, well, it's continuing, but parts of this chapter are just recently ending. And the climate science thing has really been sort of not at the forefront for me. And that, again, was kind of a choice that I made until very recently. And it has really started to kind of come back. And I'll tell you why in a moment. But essentially, this third chapter, this kind of just started last year when I became a certified forest therapy guide. I also became a DC master naturalist, and have just embarked on a regenerative sabbatical for the last 4 months, where I've taken a break from full-time work. I'm studying regenerative design and really applying that as a lens to all of the work that I do. So coaching and facilitation and other things. And essentially what has happened and what I have observed and learned as I've navigated these 3 chapters is that people are burned out. Right now, like 9 out of 10 of my coaching clients they come to me either saying they're burned out, or they discover through the process of coaching that they are burned out. They're exhausted, they're stressed, they're often lonely, and sometimes grieving the loss of a way of life that they kind of no longer recognize. And some of this is definitely driven by the COVID pandemic, for sure. but it's still kind of ongoing. And meanwhile, at the same time, the planet is showing similar symptoms of burnout, exhaustion, stress, loneliness, and grief. And a lot of my clients are kind of noticing that. They're maybe not necessarily noticing that the symptoms are exactly the same, but they're aware that both things are happening. And they are really kind of concerned about what they're seeing going on with the planet. And they kind of want to do something about it, but they don't know how. And they don't know where to start, and often they feel too tired to even begin because they're burned out and exhausted and stressed, right? So it's like this kind of vicious cycle. And so I've essentially just chosen I've made a commitment to just proactively design the next chapter of my life and my career to address these dual challenges of human sustainability and planetary sustainability. Because I really firmly believe that we can't really address one without addressing the other. So that is essentially like the topic of today's talk and why I'm interested in this, why I care about it. And so that kind of tells you why I care about it. But now I really want to get into like why you might want to care about it too, if you don't already. So this gets into the question of why this. So I mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals in my objectives. This is really one of the key pieces of sort of information that I just want to share. And before I jump into it, I just want to do kind of a quick pulse check. If anybody here, maybe we can do a quick show of hands, is familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals. I've at least heard of it. Okay, I've got a thumbs down. Anybody else? Okay. So we will jump right into what it is. And you might recognize this as we go. So the Sustainable Development Goals were created by the United Nations member states several years ago. And it's essentially a list of 17 goals that have been identified through lots and lots and lots of research and discussion. These goals have been identified as like what will create peace and prosperity for people in the planet. And so there's 17 of them. They've been identified as like urgent, call to action by many nations, both developed and developing. And what's interesting about these, especially for people who are maybe kind of new to the sustainability space, is if you look at the topics here, it's not all about the environment. A lot of people think like, oh, sustainability, that's just about like recycling or solar panels or something like that. But there's a lot of stuff on here, like no poverty, zero hunger, gender equality. Like that's not just the environment, right? So that's what I really like about these goals is that it sort of opens up the aperture for all of us to find something in there that we kind of care about or want to learn more about. And so with that in mind, I like to check in and just see if you take a look at these 17 goals, is there one in particular that kind of stands out to you that you feel kind of compelled to support or move forward? And we can speak it out since it's a small enough group, or you can put it in the chat if you feel like that.
I mean, it's tough to prioritize, but I'm personally drawn towards climate action.
Climate action, yep.
I would say poverty.
Anybody else? Poverty, yeah.
Yeah, the big one for me.
Yeah. So if you still have your piece of paper, I invite you, I should say, to use my forest bathing terminology, to just jot that down real quick. You don't have to remember which number it's associated with, but just jot down the phrase of the goal that you're most compelled to move forward. And by saying, okay, I'm most compelled to move that one forward, you're not necessarily like rejecting the other ones, don't worry. You can still support them and work on them, but it's helpful just to identify one, at least for the purposes of tonight. Okay, so at this point, you might be thinking like, it's all good, right? We've got all these goals, we're off to the races. Not exactly, turns out. So some of the bad news here. So it turns out that less than 1/5 of the total targets on that list are actually on track to be achieved or resolved by 2030, which was the target date that the UN member states set when they established these goals. Okay, so we're like getting close. We're only 6 years away from that. And every year there's a report that comes out. This is a snapshot of the one from this year. And it's a little bit staggering to see. Only about 20% of the SDGs are on track to be achieved by 2030. And almost an equal number, about 20% of those targets have actually regressed in recent years. So the opposite of progress. And it's not just that. If you actually look at just the United States in particular, all of the 17 goals they fall into the categories of challenges remain, significant challenges remain, or major challenges remain. And 8 out of the 17 are considered stagnating in the United States, with nearly 30% of the total targets considered worsening. Okay, so this is not great. Any ideas what might be going on here?
I think
what might be causing this?
I think one of the things is I feel like a lot of these topics have a connection. And I think sometimes we spend our energy, over one topic, but not making connections to other things. And so I think that's I'm not saying that's the only thing, but I think it's part of our problem.
Yeah. I think you're right about that. I think it's like it's systemic, right? There's a lot of things that are connected in systems. And so if we get too kind of narrowly focused, it can be hard to make progress on anything. What else might be going on here?
I think, to Ashanti's point about overly focusing on one of these areas, I think that there's a lot of people who are in denial about these things, or they're more focused on issues that are not as important. That maybe there's, distraction coming from, who knows, but people are more wrapped up in their own stuff to focus on what these seem to be, big societal problems to have to work through.
Yeah, they're almost like too big to try to solve. So it's easier just to maybe focus on some smaller things that we might be able to fix and be able to see results in a faster way. Yeah. And to be perfectly clear, for most of these, like almost all of them, it's not really a matter of like not having the science or the technology to fix it. We kind of know how to fix these things in many ways, even though they are really big. And we have had some problems with, just kind of basic like leadership and action, right? So I like this quote here. Gerald Weinberg, who's an author and a computer scientist. And this quote is, no matter what the problem is, it's a people problem, which might sound very familiar, especially for those of you who are facilitators in the room. It's like, we just have to like put our heads together and like figure out how to work together and make the humans kind of get along and agree and prioritize and all that good stuff. So if that's the case, and I'm making a bit of an assertion here, but if that's the case, there's some good news, right? I shared with you a bunch of bad news just a moment ago, but here's the good news. So as visual practitioners, you may recognize a few of them in this photo. We deal in human problems. So like, this is our jam. This is our opportunity to actually get our hands dirty, roll up those sleeves, and like put in some work. Because if there's anyone who's like uniquely qualified to handle human problems and help other humans navigate through those human problems, it's visual practitioners. So that gets to the third question that I had that you might be wondering, which is kind of like, why are we talking about this now? Of all, the different months of the year or years that we could have had this topic. And there's a very good reason for it. So I would like to, at this point, introduce you to something called the Inner Development Goals. First, show of hands, has anybody heard of this before? Curious. Okay, I'm not surprised to hear that. It's a very kind of new concept. It was developed about 4 years ago in Sweden, but now it's a global movement. And it's good news because there's basically a group of very smart people who've come together in a not-for-profit open source organization. And their mission is to inspire and equip humans, the individuals, the organizations, and the government to make a significant difference on sustainable development through cultivating their inner capabilities. Okay, so this is the human stuff. Another way of looking at it, because we're all visual people here, is if the SDGs are the outer ring, and those are like the external challenges, that's that whole list of 17 challenges. The IDGs are our internal capacities to actually address those challenges. And so the whole concept of the IDGs, the inner development goals, is to invest in those internal capacities so that we can actually see some progress on these external challenges. And so by now, I hope you're kind of beginning to see how like visual practitioners, facilitators, coaches, that kind of profession, those domains could have a pretty big impact in this space. Because essentially, if you look at this diagram, like that's just what we do, right? Like we're taking all these external challenges that like our teams and our organizations might be grappling with, and we're helping them develop their like inner capacities to work through them and to like be a more high performing team or a more efficient organization or whatever it is, a stronger like leadership executive team. These are often the places that we are playing. Oh, there's a doorbell. Oh, okay. We have somebody entered. Got it. So to get to the answer to the question of why now. So the inner development goals, there's a summit. I think it's every year. I'm pretty sure it's every year. And it's actually happening next week. It's in Stockholm, but it's also online. So that answers the question, hopefully, of why now, because I wanted to share this with you all sort of as a preview and maybe entice you to check out some videos or something from the conference if you are interested in doing so. And so there's a bunch of people like me who are, and others around the world who are like hosting online and in-person gatherings to share the inner development goals and the summit itself with as many people as possible. It's a very cool event. They have a lot of good content. And one of those pieces of content here is this framework that I'm gonna share with you, and we're gonna actually dive into this and do a little activity around it. So this is the inner development goals on a single slide. And essentially, don't worry about like memorizing it or anything right now, because we're gonna go into this in more detail. But the way to think about it or to look at it is across the top are these 5 dimensions. And then within each dimension, there are 4 or 5 skills. So there's 23 skills in total across 5 dimensions. And again, I'll be sharing all this later, so you can take a closer look at the graphic when you feel like it. But what we're going to do is actually dive into it. We're going to do a little 1-2-all kind of activity. We're going to start with just some individual reflection around the inner development goals and sort of our own, do a bit of like a self-assessment. And then we'll go into pairs and discuss a little bit like our results of our self-assessment. And then we'll do a full group, just kind of debrief and kind of ask some of those bigger questions, like in the title of the talk, basically how can visual practitioners advance planetary sustainability? So if y'all are game for that, we'll start with the individual reflection piece. Actually, I'll just pause real quick before we even jump into like activity stuff. Are there any questions or like curiosities about anything I've covered so far that we want to go back to? All right, I'm seeing a no. Cool. Okay. So let's dive in. We'll start with our individual reflection, and this is where your little piece of paper comes in handy again. So hopefully you have your piece of paper. If you don't, it's not a big deal. You can just find one now. you don't even have to do the whole folding thing if you haven't already, but if you have, I would just flip it over to the other side, and we're gonna write each of the 5 dimensions in a box, just so you're not gonna fill up all 8 boxes. And the 5 dimensions are listed here: being, thinking, relating, collaborating, and acting. There we go, Brian, got it on the screen. And so once you have that, just give me like a quick thumbs up. All right. Okay, cool. All right, so the way this is going to work, probably take like about a minute for each of these. We'll see. I don't think we'll take too much longer than that, but we'll see. You can let me know. And we're just going to do a little bit of like self-reflection or reflection and self-assessment. So what I will do is show on the slide a description of what each dimension means, and then I'll show a slide that has the five or the 4 skills within each one. But really, this is kind of time for you to like take a bit of a break and take a bit of a breather, just kind of like self-assess and reflect on your own experience. So don't worry so much about like reading the slides. In fact, that's why I chose to do this activity on paper instead of like in Mural or something, just because it feels like we're all spending so much time on screens these days. I was like, let's just have a little like analog paper time. So I will read through some of this and just kind of walk us through it, and you all can tell me if you need more time. Okay. So in the box where you wrote the word being, this is the first dimension. So we're going to start with being, and this is all about your relationship to yourself. And what I would like for you to do is just reflect on your skillfulness in this dimension. And you can consider each of the skills that are within this. So we have 5 here that are listed: inner compass, integrity and authenticity, openness and learning mindset, self-awareness, and presence. I do have a second slide that has the kind of descriptions of each of those, but hopefully you kind of can get a good enough sense that you won't necessarily need to read through it all. And the activity here is really just to reflect on your current state with this, and just give yourself a skillfulness rating on a scale of 1 to 5, where 1 is being low skill and 5 is high skill. And just write that number in the box, in the being box on your paper. And I'll go ahead and put up the individual skills here in case you want to dive a little deeper.
I have a question. Are we rating ourselves in each one of these skills, these sub skills, or
just the dimension, just being like overall?
1 to 5. Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yep. Yeah. And I do have a version of this activity where you rate yourself on each of the skills. But I wanted to kind of keep it a little bit higher level here. Totally up to you though, if you want to. I see Brian's kind of putting a little more detail on it, which I like. See if I can move my little, yeah, there we go. Now I can see it. Would anybody like more time? Yeah, okay. And actually, I'm going to do this too because I've done it before, but it's been a while. Okay, are we ready to move on to the next one? Okay. All right, so the next one, this pretty pink color, this is all about thinking. So our cognitive skills. And again, we're just going to be reflecting on kind of our current state, 1 to 5 for the overall category. And if you want to, you can also go one by one through each of the skills. And we've got critical thinking, complexity awareness, perspective skills, sense making, and visioning. And I'll put up the definition or the description of each of those. Are you guys able to read the text? Is that too small? Oh, it's good. Okay. I was a little bit worried that these might be a little too small. And these slides, if you're wondering too, like the design and the color and everything, it comes from the inner development goals. They have a whole kind of design framework. Anybody need more time on this one? All right, shall we move on to the next one? All right, I'm getting some thumbs up, getting some nods, very good. Okay, number 3, this is relating, caring for others and the world. We've got appreciation, connectedness, humility, empathy, and compassion. This also includes our relationship to our environment, future generations, the biosphere.
I think for this one, I'm going to stop sharing my answers.
Yeah, it starts to get a little like personal, like revealing. Is that a thumbs up saying that you're done? Okay, all right. And I'm seeing a nod from Ashanti. Yes, you good on this one? Okay, great. Okay, next we have collaborating, social skills. We've got communication skills, co-creation skills, inclusive mindset and intercultural competence, trust and mobilization. You're gonna put your scores back up, Ryan? No, I'm not being nosy.
I'm feeling a little bit more confident about this one.
Yeah, I thought you might. I thought you might. Would anybody like a little more time with this one? No? Okay, great. Okay, last one. Acting, enabling change. Qualities such as courage, creativity, optimism, and perseverance. And we've got a description of each of those here. Okay. Anybody need a little more time with this? No? Okay. Great. Okay, so that concludes our individual reflection. And again, this is just sort of that snapshot of the whole framework altogether. So you might just want to kind of take a moment to scan the whole thing and make any adjustments to your self-assessment as needed. And now our final sort of individual reflection question is going all the way back to the very beginning when I asked you to write down the sustainable development goal that you were most compelled to move forward. And the question here is just how might you apply your unique skills toward advancing that sustainable development goal? And there might be something obvious that comes up right away, or this may be like a longer term reflection question that you have to kind of sit with for a while. So don't feel compelled to have an answer right now. Okay. And so when we're ready, so I'm going to put us into pairs. And we're just going to discuss a little bit, sort of, let's see, let me make sure I've got my spot. Here we go. This is what we're going to discuss. What our own inner development edge is. And then once we've kind of discussed that, and we can go back and forth with these two questions a little bit. When you think about your client, whether you are an internal coach or facilitator or visual practitioner or maybe external, when you think about people that you're working with and partnering with, where do you see the greatest need for inner development? So you've kind of done the self-assessment, but now that you kind of know enough about the framework, you can probably also do a little bit of a kind of light touch assessment of some of the people or projects that you're working on, maybe even like a whole organization. Like, wow, the culture here is really strong on collaborating, but maybe low on acting or something like that. So we'll spend maybe about 10 minutes here, and then when we come back, we can share a little bit more with the larger group, and we'll kind of wrap things up with a couple of more some resources that you can look into and maybe kind of take some further action. Sound good? Cool. Okay, great. So thank you to all the pairs and everybody who kind of shared on their reflections of how the inner development goals are showing up as development edges for us, but also for our clients. And that kind of leads me to really the headline question that was in the title of the talk, which is how might we as visual practitioners collectively, so no longer just individually, but like all of us as a community, how could we collectively advance planetary sustainability? And this really kind of goes back all the way to the very beginning when I asked you to do the crazy eights activity at the very beginning, where we wrote down like, what are the most important skills in a visual practitioner? Because my hunch, and I think this kind of came true, was that like some of the things we wrote down are inner development goals. Like they're on the list. What do we think?
Well, I guess I'll go first. So thinking about climate action, and especially relating it to, I think of those five, for lack of a better word, what do you call those? The things we just
The
looked at.
dimensions? Yeah,
Mentions.
dimensions.
So I'm drawn towards climate action. I rated myself more or less highly on acting and collaborating. So, maybe
Yeah.
that's organizing, maybe that's modeling the way, maybe that's just like living, a more sustainable life and collaborating with others to do the same.
Yeah, nice. Thank you.
I think you also had the angle of it on what can we do as visual collaborators, or visual practitioners, excuse me.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an interesting question because as facilitators, we try to maintain a neutral stance. I've facilitated for groups that I patently disagree with in terms of their goals and their values, but that's not my job. My job is to hold the space for them, not to say, well, you're doing it wrong or I disagree with you. And we can, I don't want to use the word influence, but we can shape the thinking in the room based on the way that we design an event or the way that we string certain modalities and activities together. Pulling in things like, for example, context maps or system maps or some of those things that encourage more systems thinking, or at least thinking about the consequences of actions. So maybe it's about using the tools to hopefully guide people towards a deeper understanding of the impact of their decisions.
Yeah. Interesting. I like those ideas. Yeah.
Yeah, I think about like when I'm working, so I have like a climate client that I work with from year to year. And I think for me, right now it's mostly just thinking about how I'm sharing their stories through illustrated means. So being intentional about, the visuals, the emotions, right, that are carried, through the discussion and into the actual visual itself. I think, I'm glad I had an opportunity to come to this because as I'm thinking about going out and doing an innovation workshop with a colleague of mine, I'm also, thinking about what kind of tools, to Brian's point about shaping the conversation, as they're thinking about like patients and things that they want to do within the health system, like, the empathy part, like how do we get them to empathize with, the end users, the patients, and not sort of make it more of an operational, because again, I don't want to show up, in a neutral, as a facilitator, not trying to tell somebody to do, but I think like, how do you shape the conversation around like starting with empathy, right? And then going towards like solutioning and whatnot, looking at understanding to a point. But,
Yeah, that empathy thing is huge for facilitators and coaches, people who are coming in to help an individual or a team or organization make progress toward whatever their goals might be, coming in from that place of empathy and compassion and just caring about them is such a big part of the job, right? And trust was on the list too. That comes to mind as well. Like really building that trust, so they trust you, but also vice versa. Yeah. All right. So I think with that, what we'll do is we'll kind of shift into the final chapter of tonight's session, which is hopefully going to be kind of exciting and a bit inspiring. We shall see. I mean, you tell me. And this is really kind of like how to get involved. So if you are interested in this topic and you want to find out more, there's just a lot. There's a lot out there. There's some good stuff. So I'm going to run through just a couple of things that, again, like I kind of mentioned, all the open tabs. So I've been kind of diving deep into some of this stuff recently, and I've come across a couple of really neat opportunities that I think will resonate with this group. The first one is just about the inner development goals themselves. If you're interested in this kind of thing, you can actually contribute to it because it's evolving. So the version that we just walked through is like, I don't know, 2.0, 3.0, who knows which version necessarily. It's always evolving. So you can actually fill out a very quick survey. I think it's like 3 questions, and it's anonymous. You don't have to like give your information. And it's basically just like answering the question, like, what are the skills and qualities that are most needed to like advance, the sustainable development goals? So you could put in things that you've already seen tonight, or something maybe that you wrote down that at the beginning that did not show up on the list of inner development goal skills. So just something to consider. And if you do it this week, you will get in exchange for your input. You can optionally separately request that they send you a free virtual ticket to the summit next week, so you can like check it out if you want. So that's one way. That's pretty straightforward to get involved. Another one, which is cool, is there's actually these hubs. So the inner development goals community is really growing and thriving. It's now global, and there's like little groups that have been established all around the world. And so if this is something that you're very interested in, you can check out the hubs. Find one near you and get involved that way. The next one that I wanted to share with you, I actually would love to hear. Have any of you heard about this thing called climate fresque? This is a really interesting term. I had never even heard the term fresque before, but apparently, okay, so this is very cool. Essentially, this person who'd been working in like climate and sustainability for a long time designed a game that people play like in small groups, kind of like cards on a table, and it's this like interactive game, and it's all about collective climate action. So it's not like where there's like an authority or subject matter expert that's like telling people what to do. It's the whole group basically decides what to do. And this game, you can just like go to an event and like play it and have the experience when someone else is like facilitating the game. But then once you've done that, you can actually learn to facilitate this for others. So I thought this might be something very cool for this group to check out, because there are so many people who do like games and facilitation, and like it made me think of like Lego Serious Play and other topics that this community is kind of into. And I did a little bit of digging, and it turns out there actually is an event coming up here in the DC area in not next week, but the week after. It's October 22nd. It's in person, 9 to 12 Eastern in McLean. It's at the Emmanuel Presbyterian Church. And so like you can sign up and meet people and play this game in person, and then you can like sign up to be a facilitator at a later time. There are also versions of it that are online. So like if you don't want to do it in person, you can look for an online version, and they're in like all different languages and stuff. So that's one that I thought you might want to check out. And then the next one is called The Week. Has anybody heard of this? Okay. So Brian, I know you know Frederick Laloux, the author of the book Reinventing Organization. So this is his project. He and his wife designed this thing called The Week, and it's a series of short films. Well, they're like an hour long. It's 3 films, and they did this like during the pandemic, and then they shared it with their friends, and it became this like popular snowball thing where like now they've open sourced it, basically they've outsourced it or crowdsourced it. So like now anybody can host a screening essentially of this series of 3 films and then facilitate a discussion around it. And it's all about climate and what's happening. And they do the U shape from Theory U of like kind of going down into the deep and then coming back up. I'm signed up for one that's coming up in November. Y'all are invited if you want to join it with me. It's based out of the UK. And the woman who is hosting it is like a coach friend of mine. So if you're interested, share with me like in a direct message or whatever, like which email address you would like me to share. And then if there's still room in her group, I will have her invite you directly. Okay. Thank you. Because I think it's one of those where it's like you have to be invited kind of thing. So yeah, I'm super excited about it. It is a bit of a time commitment. So it's, I have it in a note here. It is, the one I'm doing is the week of November 18th. And it's Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And it's like from 1:30 to 3 p.m. Eastern. So you actually like watch the movie all together and then you discuss it. So just be kind of aware that that's the time commitment. But that one I'm really excited about. And again, once you like watch it, like you can sign up to just host one of these for your friends and family or your neighbors or whatever you want. It's very cool. We will figure out a time for everybody to do that. In fact, I might just post one. Like after I've done it, I think we could just do one here. So that's the week. Definitely wanted to share that with y'all. For anybody here in the group who's a coach, there's a really interesting organization. This is actually how I learned about almost all of this. This is the Climate Coaching Alliance. It's a global group, it's an alliance. It's free to join. And it's essentially just like an interest group of coaches who care about the climate and kind of like want to make a difference and want to make an impact. And they have subgroups for geographies, but also subgroups for like interest areas. So I'm a member of the coaching in nature group because I do a lot of coaching in nature and I'm a forest therapy guide. And that's actually how I met the woman who's hosting the week screening in November. She's the co-chair of that group. So that's a really interesting organization. They have a lot of good like webinars and stuff like that. And then just if you want to work with me, because I love partnering with people, if you want to kind of like get involved and come up with something that we could do together, these are just like kind of some of the categories of work that I've been doing recently and kind of want to do more of. So one-on-one coaching that's my bread and butter. I think most of you know that. I do a lot of virtual coaching with people all around the world, but more recently I've started doing coaching in nature, where I do like a walk and talk in the forest kind of thing here in the DC area. Also some visual coaching and then forest bathing walks, which you can sign up for a public walk, but you can also work with me to like create a private walk for like you, your family, or your organization. And let's see, team stuff, team coaching, team performance workshops, that kind of stuff, leadership team offsites. And then I mentioned like the private group forest bathing walks, which are really good for like wellness events and corporate events, that kind of stuff, corporate retreats. And then this is really, I mean, all of this, but especially the last category is where I feel like I would love to partner with people in this community who are doing this work as well. Leadership development programs, strategic visioning. I'm working a lot on like regenerative organizational design stuff, which is very interesting. It's like basically biomimicry for organizations. And then doing like inner development goals presentations like this and bringing it into organizations. There's a lot of really good information on the inner development goals website about organizations that are already using these and like the case studies. So IKEA is like the famous example. They use the inner development goals as like their leadership competencies. It's very cool stuff. So that's other opportunities. And then, oh yeah, fun thing, most important thing. So I made this canvas, like a little workshop kind of canvas that people can use to essentially do the activity that I demonstrated with all of you tonight, but in a little bit more kind of like robust way. So the canvas itself, you go through it the way that Brian did, where you actually like self assess on each of the skills, and then you can kind of shade in this little radar map and have kind of a color diagram of like a snapshot in time. And then, you know, you can do one for yourself, you can have your team do it, you can kind of compare and contrast however you want to use it. So that is a resource that is available to everybody in this group. I will drop the file in the chat. In fact, I can do it right now before I forget. And so y'all can download it and take it with you. There's also, it's not shown here on the slide, but there's a second page that has the definitions of each of the skills. Here it is. I'm just going to drop it in the chat. So that's a resource, and you're welcome to use that for yourself, but also with your clients if you would like to. And then lastly, I just want to acknowledge some contributions. content for sure, and definitely inspiration. Whitney Hess, who is a fabulous coach, and photography by David Wardrick and our friend Bryant Cox. And that's it. Please keep in touch. There's all my info.
Well, Sarah, thank you so much for your time and for enlightening us. Great photo, by the way. You'll have to show me where that is.
Thanks.
And thanks a lot.
Happy
I got
to.
a lot out of this. Love to have you back sometime. Thank you.
Absolutely. My pleasure.